much of that is the non-owner occupied delinquency in dollars?
Blondell here.
We would
Yes.
need to work with our colleagues at the Revenue Department, so we'll
Yes,
get back
yes,
to you
yes.
on that.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Council.
Thank you for your testimony today. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman? Your mic is still open.
Forgive me.
Were you interested? You good? Thank you. Thank you. It appears that there are no more questions of these witnesses. Thank you very much for your testimony. But as always, please be prepared to be called back. We have callbacks in 2 weeks in the event that there are some additional questions. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Thank you.
You're
Have
welcome.
a good afternoon.
Next up, we got streets. And next up, we have the Department of Streets. Morning.
Good morning, Council President. Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. I'm Carlton Williams, Streets Commissioner. Joining me today are Richard Montanez, Deputy Commissioner of Transportation, Keith Warren, Deputy Commissioner of Sanitation, and Christopher Newman, Deputy Commissioner for Administration. I am pleased to provide testimony on Streets Fiscal Year 2019 operating budget. The Streets Department has made remarkable strides this fiscal year, and we are poised and excited to embark on major strategic plans for fiscal year 2019. As Council is aware, Streets is at the vanguard of the city's strategic zero waste and Vision Zero efforts, pursuing highly ambitious goals regarding litter reduction and waste diversion, the expansion of roadway resurfacing capacity, and continued actualization of multimodal traffic calming and safety. We are very proud to report that we have made tremendous progress towards these critical objectives. The department is committed to our role as an integral part of the Mayor's Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet, and we continue to pursue interdepartmental efforts in this regard. Our sanitation division, under direction of Deputy Commissioner Keith Warren, has fully embraced and implemented a strategic approach towards assessing and implementing multiple and varied waste diversion initiatives. This includes, for example, the implementation of the new comprehensive neighborhood litter assessment indexing system that objectively scores area litter conditions, allowing for targeted proactive response to locations most in need of sanitation services, and engaging community residents with neighborhood litter plans to prevent illegal dumping and other litter conditions. The department has also completed the much anticipated organics feasibility study, which promises to help find alternative ways to divert more material from the waste stream. The department's transportation division, under the leadership of Deputy Commissioner Richard Montanez, remains committed to the city's Vision Zero initiative and strategic approach to the city's overall safe and complete transportation network. This notably includes a major target milestone this fiscal year. Streets successfully established a new second paving crew, which will significantly expand roadway resurfacing operations and put us on track towards a targeted 75 miles of resurfacing this fiscal year, with plans to resource a third crew to achieve our long-term objective of 131 miles annually within the next 5 to 6 years. We are also hoping to substantially increase investment in Vision Zero initiatives overall, with the proposed addition of more than 70 new additional positions in fiscal year 2019 dedicated to various transportation division programs. Our plans for fiscal year 19 will also allow us to continue to expand initiatives targeted to improve infrastructure and provide multimodal traffic safety solutions throughout the city. Streets has also embarked on an exciting new technological management and efficiency improvements, which promise to greatly enhance our operational productivity and performance. For example, our entire sanitation and recycling fleet contingent, as well as department snow operation vehicles, have been equipped with GPS systems to better monitor and gauge efficiency and resource allocation during operations. We have already seen increases in on-time collections and much more responsiveness and flexibility for both sanitation and winter storm operations. I would be remiss if I did not mention my sincere appreciation for the tremendous snow and ice removal services performed by our streets employees, as well as the employees from multiple partner agencies during the very challenging winter season that featured 13 winter events and multiple difficult nor'easters. The Streets Department and its employees continue to rigorously pursue our mission of clean and green and safe streets. We are especially excited to present a proposed budget today that we believe will allow us to make tremendous progress in addressing many of the department's strategic priorities. We therefore request your favorable consideration of this budget request, and we thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. The deputy, staff, and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First questions first. So, if you're driving and you hit one of those gigantic potholes and you bust your tire, bend your rim, and you believe it to be the city's fault, what's the process in filing a claim?
Yeah. So the first
Not to suggest that that's happening, but
Yeah.
just in case.
Understood. That's been quite common this year, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We work with risk management, where they have to fill out a claim form with the information and the incident and the location, and risk management will begin to start an investigation to process that claim. They have to go through their insurance company first, and ultimately the city then follows up with any other cost that's associated outside of the insurance cost that wasn't covered.
Okay. And where's that listed, the process? Is it on a website or anything? Would a person actually know what to do?
We do have it on our PhiladelphiaStreets.com website, and they can also contact directly risk management if that occurs.
Or call city council, which has been going on.
Which sometimes that's definitely occurs. Yes.
Okay. In your budget detail, section 41, page 59, there's an estimated $75,000 line item in FY18 for to be determined, and that's just an example. So we have several line items listed as to be determined, which in the aggregate total literally in the millions of dollars. Can you tell me what that's about? Like, why do we have so many of those and to that level?
Good afternoon, Council President. Richard Montanez, Deputy Commissioner of Streets Department. If you're referring to Code 399 and 427, they're just because the contracts have not been awarded, and so therefore we do not have the name of the contractor yet.
Okay, so we know what we're going to do. We just don't know who the vendor will be and I guess the amount in total.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Could I have the transportation guru come up to the table, please? Sorry to call you that, but
Yes, I'll give my name.
I saw a little thing, between.
Okay, we're good. Mike Carroll, Deputy Managing Director for the Office of Transportation and Infrastructure Systems.
All right, good. So, you and I have had some spirited debates about bike lanes and things related to that. What I want to ask you today, in the city of Philadelphia, and I've been told it's a good thing because the city is booming and the vehicular traffic has grown exponentially over time, kind of inconsistent with this thought that new people moving in don't have cars, and I disagree with that because it's just not a reality. What's the game plan for our vehicular traffic? Because I know we have an exhaustive study as it relates to bike lanes and bikes and all the things associated with that. What is the game plan for the vehicular traffic? I mean, I think all of us kind of witness that every morning and in the evening, coming down Broad or wherever. And it's actually throughout the city. In a lot of instances, we've actually condensed lanes and eliminated lanes because we want to have bike lanes. And I'm not here to talk about bike lanes today, but I need to know what we're going to do about the vehicular traffic across our city.
I'd like to kind of reframe a little bit.
Reframe? Meaning you don't want to talk about it?
No, I'll talk about it, but I think that the idea that the traffic is growing isn't really right. Because when you look at the kind of the box, remember the papal visit, we had the box. So you think about from river to river, Vine Street down to Pine Street. There's actually less traffic now than there was in 2000, and it's actually significantly less traffic.
There's less traffic in the city.
Yep. So we've
Wait a
got
minute,
about.
hold.
Well,
Before you get on the roll, because you have a way of getting on the roll. There's less traffic in the city than there was before. Is that what you're saying?
So I'm not talking about the whole city of Philadelphia.
I am.
So in the region, I know, and in the city, it's not more. But if we're talking about where the congestion is worse in Center City.
No, this is what you do. All right,
Okay.
this is why you and we have and this is people that I talk to, it's not just me, people, I think we have a traffic issue in the city, and it's increasing. And I hear people talking about it all the time. I can't get around. I mean, and it could be for whatever reason. It could be because we decided to close Kelly and Martin Luther King, Bob, at the same time as we have something else going on, and you got all the traffic flowing up 33rd Street. So it's not just Center City. Is there a plan, or if you genuinely don't believe that we have an increasing traffic issue, then I would understand why you don't have a game plan. Is that your thought, that we don't have an increasing vehicular traffic issue?
We have transportation problems, clearly, and
Transportation as in vehicular traffic.
Traffic is a component of that. So in some areas, yes, we have traffic problems.
All right.
In my opinion, those problems are concentrated in Center City. So that's why I begin by answering what I see going on in Center City.
Is that based on an assessment?
Yes.
An analysis?
Yes.
Or based on what you see?
The counted cars, the number of cars that were counted in a given time period back in 2000 compared to 2015. So things changed. So between 2015 and 2018, we got more going on. So there's probably more traffic now than there was in 2015. But the trend, and this is a trend for Center City, and it should trend for the region at large, so the 5 counties. So, I'm making an assumption that if you go from Center City to the 5 counties, that the city of Philadelphia, county of Philadelphia, probably is following the same trend. But on a specific route, 33rd Street, maybe there's more traffic there. I can't dispute that, but we can find out. We can look at the data and actually, without me guessing or, me trying to make an assumption, look at the facts and we can determine whether there's more cars there or not. That's not difficult. But your question was about the plan, right?
Yeah, I'm like, Ogons Avenue, people don't like taking Ogons. I don't live up in Ogons Avenue.
Sure.
I talk to people and people actually don't like taking Ogons Avenue anymore, so they take Broad Street.
Okay.
Because the traffic has increased and it's throughout the city. So I'm just saying, is there a plan? But
Yes.
all right.
Yes. And so, not to focus too much on Center City, but there's a plan that's focused on Center City and there's a plan that's focused citywide.
Okay.
And so the plan that's focused citywide, this is something we'll be coming around talking to folks on council about in the next couple of weeks, really, next couple of months. And our plan is to roll it out. And the idea is what that does is it frames the kinds of projects we're going to be looking at for the rest of, hopefully 2 terms of the administration. And the idea, though, is really mostly focused on safety. Because the fact is, if you compare the city of Philadelphia to other cities around the country, we're not really one of the most traffic congested cities around the country. We're like number 25, okay? Top 10 population, but 25 in terms of traffic. We are the worst in terms of people getting killed and injured, though. So that's the priority that the administration set to focus on, is to deal with the people who are getting killed on the streets.
So it's not about the increased traffic, because you're talking about everything but what I asked you about.
Traffic.
You keep, every time I
Traffic.
talk to you, you want to talk about everything, but is there a plan to deal with traffic?
Yes,
now you're talking
yes.
about safety, you're focused on
Yes,
safety.
there
You
is.
dealing with,
Yes, there is.
can you just kind of lay it out, please?
Okay, so what we're dealing with is mostly focused on Center City, like I'm telling you. And so in Center City, the idea is we need to take better advantage of the technology that's advanced since our equipment went in place in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s.
Okay.
So we need to modernize things. Now, fortunately, there's a lot going on in terms of this technology. So you have information you're getting from people's cell phones, from the GPS in their car, and that information is actually able, in some places, to communicate with the equipment on the street. So the traffic signals, they're able to actually figure out in real time who's going where, how many cars are on a specific corridor. Our technology isn't up to snuff to do that yet, but the goal first is to get on the corridors where we have the worst traffic, those upgrades in place. We've been able to work with PennDOT on a number of corridors throughout the city to do this on specific grants, but we don't have a comprehensive plan to do that, and that's what we're working on first.
So do we anticipate having that anytime soon?
That's the first thing we're going to do. So we need the money.
The first thing we're going to do when?
We're going to get started on that this year.
This week. Okay.
This year, I said.
This year?
Yes.
As in now?
We are hoping to meet with SEPTA.
It's not the first time we've had this conversation.
Well,
And it's like, if you're telling, I'm okay with hearing, because I've been here for a lot of years, I'm okay with somebody saying, no, we're not going to do it this year. We're not going to do it. I'm okay with that.
This is not a one-year job, though. I want to be clear about that.
I'm just asking you, when are you going to start?
This year. And hopefully this will be a conversation where we'll be bringing you in to talk about specifics in June or July.
Okay. And not just me. It's not about me.
Sure.
I hear this from everybody, and people complain. There's actually an article in the newspaper, in the Inquirer, big article about traffic in the city of Philadelphia. Did you see it?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So in June, we'll start having a conversation with members of council about this plan?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll refrain also from talking about bike lanes. Don't feel like having my Twitter thing blown up today. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
And I know it's been a challenging year. I think winter's finally over. I think that's the rumor. I don't know. I'm not sure.
We hope
But
so.
your department did a great job. in
Thank you, sir.
cleaning up. I thought particularly because it just seemed like things were coming one after the other. But obviously, what comes after the cleanup often is, as was mentioned, the pothole.
Mhm.
How far along are you on that? Just on time frame when a complaint comes in,
Our service level is three business days, and we've been doing it about 2.3 on
Okay.
average, which is above what we've set out to do.
So you're doing well. And I have to, the guy I bug often when we get something particularly emergency is Steve Lorenz. So I want to thank him
Yes.
for his help on those issues. One of my favorite questions is, and you talked about resurfacing more, is the time gap between when a street is milled and when the actual resurfacing is done. Oftentimes, it seemed to me that we see on occasions that there's weeks in between, and people have to travel over that, whatever you would call it,
Unpaved street.
yeah,
when it was
unpaved
milled.
street. Yeah, right. What is the average time frame on that, and as to the best of your knowledge, how are you keeping up with? I mean, you have been doing it during the winter, but I mean, as you
Right.
start to do it now,
It's usually 3 weeks, weather contingent upon when the street is milled, but from the time that
3
we come
weeks in
back and pave
between.
it. Yes.
Okay. All right.
From the start of the process, yes.
Okay, because I know there's that interim time where you have to cut around the.
That's correct.
The utility? Yeah,
Right.
Okay, all right, 3 weeks, okay. And one last thing, and I've never experienced this, but we've had some calls actually right in my area. Is there a time frame where, at night, where you cut off picking up trash?
We try to follow what the city's ordinances, but sometimes we run late, especially during weather conditions. We certainly don't want to go into the next day because it affects the rest of the week.
Right.
So normally we get done around 8 p.m.
Right.
Our goal is to try to be up by finishing time, which is 3 p.m. But on average, we've been finishing sometimes between 5 and 6 p.m.
5 and
Again, that's dependent on if we're slowed down by weather or other conditions.
Okay, and again, I know the weather in this winter probably affected that, but I was surprised some people said, and it's funny, they want their trash picked up, but they say sometimes it's really late, And
Yeah, we're working on that, Councilman. As mentioned in our testimony, GPS will help us kind of manage routes more efficiently and effectively. We're already seeing gains. I think we experienced that tremendously when we had the compactor crisis and the shortage of vehicles, but Fleet has been doing a great job of replacing that fleet to get us back on a good replacement schedule. So I think those things are going to help improve our on-time collections. We've went from 86% to 93% this year so far. And so we're starting to see improvements, and we hope that to get better back to where we used to be.
Yeah, and I have to say, just personally, I see, you do a good job with that, but, some people, we get some calls from people, so I just want to run that by
It does happen
you.
on occasion, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we thank the Commissioner. He's always been great, and we like our program at the Convention Center and what he does with block captains and everybody. I wanted to ask him a question. It says here, quote, "The department plans to issue a proposed regulation under city code authorization that would establish a 5-year paving moratorium on newly resurfaced streets and roadways." Now, we know sometimes our newly paved stuff is not like dug up and redone, but it doesn't last that long. So would you explain what this means?
Sure. I'll give you a brief overview and let Deputy Commissioner Montanez talk about the process. Unfortunately, when we pave a new street, you'll find that some development project will come back in and tear the street up. And so, unfortunately, what a newly paved street would look like after a year or a couple of months starts to go back into its unfortunate condition, and it doesn't look completed and done. And so this moratorium will require developers, contractors who pull permits and do work to restore the street, part of the street, a significant portion of the street back into its condition that it was when it was newly paved. And so I'll let, again, Deputy Commissioner Montanez talk more about the program, because we did ask for additional positions to help support that initiative.
So good afternoon, Councilwoman. So yes, the Streets Department uses a system called Guaranteed Pavement Information System, is where we put our paving list. So we coordinate with all utilities to get them in there to cut the streets prior to us paving. So this would allow us, instead of the utility just replacing the trench, they may have to replace 8 feet or even curve to curve, depending how the damage is. Also, it would allow us to go after private developers. If we just recently paved a street a year ago, and now they come in with a major development that puts in so many cuts in the street, now they may have to replace the entire street curve to curve, repave brand new. It allows us to extend the life of our streets, and it would minimize our potholes.
We're fine if the contractors do it. We just didn't want to be stuck for 5 years because our streets are so bad. And but we're very, very happy if you get those who put them in to do them. But we don't. But is that just for a year? So what happens after that if it doesn't survive?
After 5 years, Councilwoman?
No, after 1 year. You said
If after 1 year the developer comes in and cuts it, depending on the disturbance they're doing, they are forced to repair so much of that street.
so. You can get to them again.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Fiona Sanchez.
Thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I have 2 rounds of questioning. One's around town and gown issues and one around contracting. But let me first start by thanking all of you. You know, as someone who appreciates the litter map, because I'm well aware of the litter index and how far we've come from my 50 public trash cans when I first got elected to now. I think we've made tremendous strides, and we have some challenges in Kensington, and I appreciate the fact that you guys never say no and always work with us around cleaning up. I know Councilman Squilla and I call you guys all the time around babysitting our encampments. Sorry for that.
No problem.
Babysit these encampments. Wanted to talk, and maybe this is a question for Michael Carroll. You know, I mentioned SEPTA before. What is the correlation between our litter index and SEPTA stops? And what are the conversations around SEPTA being a better partner in picking up the trash for their customers?
And also, I'm going to ask Nick Esposito, if you don't mind, Councilwoman, because SEPTA is a part of the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet.
They're part of the conversation, but I don't know how they're picking up the trash in all their bus stops. So,
Yeah,
and particularly Kensington Avenue, which I share with President Clark. I moved 30,000 people through Kensington and Allegheny.
Well, right. This is Mike Carroll with the Deputy Managing Director for Otis. The bus stops are the city's property, and so anything that goes on the street.
But they have a policy that they don't let people
Yes.
on with trash on their bus. So there is, I want to know, have we looked at the correlation between bus stops and litter indexes, and what's been the conversation?
Yeah, so I'll also turn it over to Nick, but I'll preface by saying there is a study on the number of trash cans that we have in the city, including SEPTA bus stops, currently being conducted to determine if it has an impact on litter. The litter index played a huge role in determining where those litter amounts are. Once we start that study and complete it, it will be able to determine whether the trash cans are an effective source of litter reduction in those areas. And I'll let Nick follow up with it as well.
Thank you. Nick Esposito, Zero Waste and Litter Director, Managing Director's Office. Thank you for your question, Councilwoman. So we have the data right now. We have the litter index on the scores on the streets and where all the stops are. So we haven't run a correlation like that with the Office of Innovation Technology, but we can do that at your request, and we can see what those correlations look like.
So they're part of your cabinet. So what has been their ideas, if any ideas, around how they can help us with the litter index and improving our litter index?
Yeah, so one is they were part of the litter index. So they went out and actually looked at their stops as well, kind of getting between that line between where the street and the curb starts and ends and where they're stationed up. So that was really huge that they were able to do that. Now that we are starting to process this data, this is our first year. They're kind of falling in line with the exact ways that we are looking through this with the other departments. So we've offered to every department that's been involved with the litter index or other operating departments to be able to come to us with their questions, with correlations that they want to look at, and then also with what we'll be doing with the litter index every year is being able to map our progress and see how we're going. So we'll be doing that with them as well.
The general manager has been, I made him get on the L. He was very gracious. He came through. He made a recognition that they needed to be a more active partner. My fear is when we wait for people to volunteer, we get close to nothing. I really believe that as part of this cabinet, there needs to be a thorough discussion around this. To give you an example, on Saturday, I don't know how many volunteers cleaned up Kensington and Allegheny. It was just atrocious. And Sunday, I drove by, and it was as if all of those volunteers were not there. I have a constituent who sends me pretty poignant emails all the time about how I do nothing because Kensington and Allegheny is dirty. I think he lives on Councilman Squalla's side of the district. But anyway, we need to deal with this. And I'm glad that we have all these data matrix, but unless there's a particular ask and we're very specific about it, and they look at their policy and how their policy of not letting people along with food, their customers impacts, whether it's the sidewalk. I don't want to get into all those discussions. I want to see clean bus stops. And so we need to figure that out, and have it just a real honest conversation. It's their customers, our constituents, our sidewalk, whatever it is. Anyway, so that's town and gown issues. Real quickly, I do want to talk a little bit about bike lanes because in the future, and Council President and I, American Street was a long time coming, but I never want to be in a situation where after we go and request money, I have to figure out on a block-to-block basis, how do I accommodate 63-foot trucks, an industrial zone, curb cuts, bus stops with bike lanes? And Darian and the entire team, you guys, we had to sit through numerous meetings. We have to find a better way. I cannot be told we have the money, and if we don't use the money, we're going to lose it because we restricted this multimodal thing. We have to be a little bit more thoughtful. I think we have to be more respectful to the constituents. As someone who lives in the American Street Empowerment Zone and have lived there for 20 years, there has to be a better way of doing this.
Agreed. And, I think the important thing is to recognize that, goods movement freight is essential and vital to the vitality of the city. And so there's some work that's gone into figuring out what kind of network we need to have in place for trucks to move around, just like everything else needs a network to move around. And I think the thing I want to leave you with is the work we're looking to do is to take the plans we have for all the different ways that people and goods move around and integrate them.
So I've lost one of the big industrial guys is selling. During this process, many of them said, Maria, I'm going to look to get out. As someone who's worked really hard to keep those manufacturing jobs in the area, we have to be more thoughtful around that stuff, right? I know there's some feelings among some folks that all they want to see is residential on American Street. I want to see jobs, right? And I don't think it's an either or, I think it's an and, but I think we have to be more thoughtful. And I'm really concerned about how many other folks are going to sell on American Street once construction starts, because their fear of what happens to, cyclists, which, by the way, American Street has no connectivity with the north and south on bike lanes, their fear of their trucks and their deliveries and, race bike lanes. I just think that is what not to do ever again, right? And again, every once in a while I get called back in for a discussion around this stuff. If, in fact, we want to reach the mayor's goals around bike lanes, I don't want to be made the bad guy when we don't think about hundreds of jobs and residents in the area. So just when we're going to submit a proposal for money, let's be very thoughtful and ensure that we respect residents before we go seek that out, at least in my district, because, again, so that's, on contracting, real quick, and I know that we've been asking, and Commissioner Carroll, you've been part of this discussion a little bit around procurement reform, contracting. Has the Streets Department ever exercised the ability to debar or not issue a contract to a contractor who is non-compliant, hasn't met EOP plans, is over budget and over scheduled?
We have not in recent memory, no.
Do you recognize that there are some folks who are non-compliant with those issues?
I think, yes, we do. And so at this stage, we're trying to work with those individual contractors where we can and how we can. I think that there's a willingness generally that we're getting from folks, especially on the professional services side, to do more, to do a better job on that. So it's an ongoing conversation, and we're hopeful that we can start to turn this around on that side. I think in terms of the contracts we have with vendors, a lot of that's on the sanitation side.
Yes, and we certainly try to hold them in terms of the compliance with our contracts with, especially with OEO, ensuring that they meet those requirements they set forth and those goals that they put in the contract as well. For performance, we haven't discontinued a contract. We have worked with multiple contractors. If one is not delivering the service at the level they're supposed to, that we have the option of using another contractor, but that's just the way the contract is structured because we have multiple vendors on that contract, especially with solid waste, but we haven't disqualified anyone from not performing.
So, do you think it's fair that we begin to establish some standards and some matrix? Because the definition of a lowest responsible bidder, and I know you guys have some discretion also, shouldn't that be complying with what they said they were going to do on another contract? And is it not unfair for us to require some matrix and some standards?
I think that's perfectly reasonable. And I think as we start to see how best value works, we do get more leverage, even though we have some leverage. And I think, one of the meaningful things is it's very important to make sure that they're working with firms, minority and women-owned firms, but also for their own workforce, that they're assigning work to people, keeping diversity and inclusion in mind and having best value in the conversation. It starts us to be able to think about those things because it's important that the people who end up owning companies had an opportunity to get the skills that they needed in order to do that. So I think this conversation starts to expand, and the good news, like I say, is there's interest on the other side of the table. So,
but we're the purchaser. There shouldn't be interest. Right. We should be demanding it. That's accountable
perfectly
for
fair.
It.
Yeah. What we see is that it's not so much that there's one outfit that's always breaking the rules. It's that everybody has their slip. And there's one job, we thought we would get at a certain level, and because the job got away from us, and, we have to own that a little bit too. At the end of the day, the goals weren't met. And that happens with more than one. It's a systematic, it's a pattern that's out there. So we really need to make sure that they are engaged, not just because they want to win the job, but because they need to understand it's important.
They want to keep the job and keep doing business with us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. The chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First, I just want to say that thank you to your department and to your commissioner. You've been very responsive to any of our requests from constituents. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
very much. I have a couple questions for you. Do we have any idea of the current projections for overtime in fiscal year 18?
$13.9 million is what our projections are for this fiscal year.
Do you think the hiring of these new positions will reduce that overtime dramatically?
We certainly believe they will. A lot of the overtime has been driven on the sanitation side of the department, basically due to the lack of available equipment, which is vastly improving, the staffing levels, which we've increased when equipment is available. Certainly we don't want to bring in people if there's no equipment available for them to perform the duties. So that goes hand in hand, and it has been improving. And ultimately, the use of technology, we believe that those three factors will play a significant role in overtime reductions. I just want to mention that prior to the winter storms, we were seeing decreases in sanitation's overtime up to $100,000 per pay period as a result of those things that I just mentioned.
So another question I have for you, thank you. On page 59 of your budget, it says Class 400 is a line item expenditure for the purchase of vehicles for $3,128,000. I was just curious why this is in your budget and maybe not fleet management.
I'm going to ask Deputy Commissioner Christopher Newman for administration to help answer the question.
Sure.
Chris Newman, Deputy Commissioner for Administration. Councilman, we actually budget our purchases for vehicles in the Streets Department budget.
So they're not in fleet management.
On the operating side, it's in the Streets Department budget. On the capital side, it's in the Office of Fleet Management.
Okay, thank you. In the last few years, we've heard about, we had to buy new trash compactors to cut down on costs. How much have we invested on trash compactors in the last 2-3 years?
Each year, we purchase about 35 new compactors for the Streets Department, and the goal was obviously to put them all back on a replacement schedule, which will reduce maintenance costs, and so that they will be available for collection. So on cost for those compactors, do we have it for the last 3 years, Chris?
For the compactors themselves?
Yeah, 35 each year.
Yeah, it's about $6 million for each year.
So is that something that's going to be ongoing every year? We're going to need that expense? That's an ongoing expense?
Yes, we want to get back on a 7-year replacement schedule cycle, which ultimately meets the industry standards for the life expectancy of a compactor. This ultimately would reduce outages and would reduce overtime on our operating end of the budget as well.
Because I remember in prior budget meetings, this is only my 3rd year of doing this, but in the prior 2, I was told a lot of the overtime was because we didn't have these vehicles, and by purchasing these vehicles, we would cut down the overtime.
That's correct. And we're starting to see those results. We couldn't purchase them all at once, so we had to have a number of years. We believe that we'll be back on that replacement schedule of 7 years in about 2 or 3 years, and then we should start seeing significant reductions, continued reductions in overtime, as we've started to see.
Let me ask you a question on signs. I think it's under page 9 of your budget testimony today. It's under the traffic engineering, maintenance, and management. And I see the average days to repair a traffic light. It looks like 1 day, which is great, getting it fixed right away. But I'm seeing the average days to repair a traffic sign is 35 days, or 29 days rather. That's the target, but it looks like we're between 34 and 35 days. Why is it taking so long to fix a sign?
Councilman, that has to do with the number of people. Currently, the traffic shop is running 5 crews only to cover the entire city. So we've had a lot of signs knocked down and due to the weather, so we're running quite a backlog. We are trying to work on that.
Is the issue in the labor to put the sign back or in the production of the sign?
On the labor to put the sign back.
The labor to put, so you have the sign stocked?
The sign shop can produce about 65 to 70 signs per day, but the crews can only put up so many depending on the work. So the crews are doing about 10 to 12 signs per day.
Okay. You know if we've had any situations where there might have been accidents where we were sued because the sign wasn't up and it cost us money?
We get sued for a lot of things, Councilman, but yeah, missing stop signs, missing yield signs, missing one-ways are one of the things we do defend the city on.
Yeah, because I would think that if we didn't have a sign up, and God forbid there's an accident.
Those are emergencies to us, and we try to get those done within
Okay.
10 days.
Okay, so you should note that on here. The more important signs are done much quicker than
Yes.
the average signs.
They are done much quicker, Councilman.
Last question I would ask. What do you think is the single biggest issue your department faces this coming year?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because we cover so many things.
Just pick one that you think is the biggest.
So on the sanitation side, I'll tell you it's illegal dumping. Our city continuously faces the challenge of picking up thousands of tons of debris after trash has been illegal dumped on our streets. We had a conversation in an initial budget conversation on how it impacts property values and the quality of life in local neighborhoods. We're struggling to try to get not only catching those people, and I think we've made improvements, but it continues to happen, and it's certainly impacting the neighborhoods. We had a community meeting a couple of weeks ago, and that is the number one issue that they said that they face every day in their neighborhoods is the level of dumping and trash and debris they have to face in their neighborhoods.
Do we have any kind of public relations marketing program around not littering in the city?
Yes, we have a Zero Starts with One campaign which focuses on litter reduction and illegal dumping that tells people how to manage their waste. I think what we're also considering is that once we catch a dumper, we certainly advertise and publicize the arrest. I think that's going to be very important for us to try to discourage this type of behavior. We also want to communicate directly to the resident on not throwing their household trash on the corner, which we're starting to see as well. And we're coming up with programs to try to address that in the near future. But I would say that's one of the biggest challenges facing
I'm
our
talking
city.
about a marketing program that's on TV, that's on radio, that talks to Philadelphians about why it's so important to keep our city clean and what they can do to help us accomplish that goal.
Yes, we've had multiple campaigns in the past. How effective they've been is questionable because it's hard to measure whether or not it's impact. If you measure it about the amount of litter, I would say it's not been as effective as it should have been because we've not seen drastic improvements in those conditions. But we have had campaigns in the past. I think the direct campaigns to try to kind of publicize and then educate our other residents will be effective.
One last comment. Well, two things. I assume we're going to be doing some repaving of a lot of the streets in the city.
Yes, so that's the second biggest challenge, and that was kind of hard because we have sanitation and transportation, which are two biggest issues. As you know, the administration has invested in the additional paving crews necessary for us to improve and get our streets back into a state of good repair. We're hoping to get to 100 miles, 75 miles at the end of this fiscal year, and then 100 miles next fiscal year, and over the next couple of years, increase that to 131 miles. So that is the biggest challenge.
And one comment to Council President Clark's about the traffic in the city. It is worse than I've seen it. But I think a lot of it is because, and I read about this in New York, Uber, Lyft, and all these other services that are now on the streets are causing more congestion. We didn't have this 5 years ago. But all these, which is, it's great business, entrepreneurial, but we just have to manage that process because I know where I see Uber and Lyft cars all over the place that I never saw before. So that's causing some of this congestion. There's articles written in New York about how much congestion this is causing in New York City from these entrepreneurs, which is, I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying we have to manage that congestion.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
sir.
Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Nick. Real quick, can I ask you guys? I actually already did it. Can you identify where, like, if you see street trash, can you identify where that trash actually comes from?
So
You look at, like along
the source,
curb
like
line and all of that.
if it's
Can you
coming
kinda
from a store or a house or yeah. So we've in the past we've tried to locate addresses in the trash. So sweep officers will open up the
Not
trash
that. No, I'm saying like the.
or
I
the
know
type
that-
of trash.
Yeah, like along the curb line,
Right.
you know, and then on the sidewalk.
That's along business corridors and
And
coming
it
from
tends to be like,
stores.
and I'm not suggesting that that's where it's coming from, but I guess maybe I am. Stores, these corner stores where you get to see the stream of potato chip bags and all this other stuff. Can you identify?
So in the past, we have not been able to identify that. I think with the new Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet, one of the focuses is to try to study where that trash is generated from. That's one of the studies that we should take into consideration, Council President. Yes,
Please.
that's something that I will work with the Cabinet to establish.
Please.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to talk about bridges, alleys, and streetlights. Let me first say, I'm truly appreciative about the responsiveness I always get from you
Thank you, sir.
and your staff. When there's a problem or a question I get an answer. Like I tell everybody, it's not always the answer I might like, but it's the answer I need to give constituents, so I'm thankful. So let's start with streetlights. There are a number of PennDOT corridors, and they are on this replacement of streetlight mission. And in 2 corridors in my district, which obviously connects to Councilwoman Blackwell's and Councilman Clark's, they've gone on this improvement plan where they're modernizing the streetlights. And they have determined through their studies where streetlights should be. Contrary to public opinion and public safety at times, on 2 different corridors, Haverford Avenue in West Philly and Allegheny Avenue in North Philly, I literally had street blocking demonstrations saying, how could you take this light out and not replace it? Now the good news is you have helped me to solve some of that. The bad news is that sometimes I have to pay for it out of capital dollars. And so somebody from Mount High decided we're going to create a more efficient way to move traffic from the suburbs to the inner city at the peril often of the residents in those districts. Can you explain that process to me and then explain what we can do to intervene early and not have to pay late to replace lights that are being modernized?
So we'll probably have to tag team between myself, Michael Carrigan, and Rich Montanez a little bit. But yeah, so I think your perceptions are very clear on this and accurate in terms of what PennDOT's objectives are. I mean, they're really about moving the cars, not necessarily just from the suburbs, but moving the cars down the corridor, and not always so much about what's going on in the neighborhoods that these corridors go through. And I don't want to fault them for that, because from their perspective, that's their mandate, that's their mission. There's been in the last few years some changes in the people who are implementing these programs, and I think they've taken the perspective that they want to really stick to the rules as they see them, and that sort of narrowed the scope in some ways for the types of conversations which would have preceded these projects being implemented. Now, some of these projects were thought out a while ago, and now PennDOT didn't have the money until recently to come in and actually do the construction work, and because of that, they felt like they had to reanalyze the situation, or sometimes they felt like the old analysis was saying one thing was going on in the neighborhood, and then we had to kind of start from scratch. But the bottom line is that they see this mission to kind of move the traffic through, which creates these situations. And like you say, we've had to come in kind of like the cavalry, so to speak, to try and figure out how to save the situation at the last minute. The good news, though, is that I think that there is now a recognition, with the new people in the seats that they're in, that we can't really keep going down this path over and over again, and they want to work with us to try and rewrite some of the rules at the district level and at the state level even, so that there is an acknowledgement that within the city of Philadelphia, these corridors need to operate differently than they may have to in other places in the state. And so there's two issues that we want to put right in front of them, and one of them is to acknowledge that the justification for a signal to be in place within a city, within a neighborhood, is going to be different and needs to be treated differently than it would be in a rural or suburban environment. And the second one, I'm sorry.
No, I really appreciate your insight on this, because they had public meetings 5 years ago, and from a blueprint, they look good. Oh, we're going to get sound sensitive lights, and we're going to replace those old stand-up lights with overhanging lights, and it sounded good until you start removing the lights and realizing that seniors have to cross these streets. And for some of them, they don't move as fast as they used to. And they were literally playing Frogger to get across these streets, or children, even worse, having to cross these streets. And we had demonstrations of people who were experiencing these changes and had to work with you to do that. So I'm thankful that we're getting ahead of this, because I, quite frankly, couldn't afford to keep replacing street lights. So I appreciate that. Second thing that I'd like to talk about a bit is the bridges. And this is something I've been on for a while. And we realized that there are 343 city-owned bridges. There are another 150 PennDOT-owned bridges. And the controller's report talked about some of the lack of maintenance on many of them. Councilman Johnson had a CMX hearing about some safety issues. Where are we today on holding the feet to the fire of those individuals, whether it's SEPTA, whether it's CSX, on keeping our bridges safe that come over our streets?
Well, I'm going to have to share this answer, but I think that the answer differs a little bit depending on which owner we're talking about. So the good news is that SEPTA and PennDOT are now funded in ways where they're able to prioritize the maintenance projects that are required to ensure that these structures are in a good state of repair. They view it as a priority. I mean, they share liability for instances where there's failures, so there's full acknowledgement on their part, and they are moving projects forward, as is the City of Philadelphia, within our capacity.
Do you have the ability to prioritize worst first?
Yes, that's the objective. Every bridge is different, and so the kind of project it takes either to make a bridge safe, to rehabilitate it, or to, in some cases, reconstruct it is going to differ, and we have to go through, use some judgment to figure out what is the best fix for a given situation. And we have a lot of bridges, so sometimes we get caught off guard and have to reshuffle the deck a little bit and approach the bridge a little differently.
But you're on it.
Yes.
Got it. Retaining walls and alleys. We literally had on Willard Street a situation, which is in North Philadelphia, where we could look out of people's back doors and see the railroad tracks, erosion, and literally had to spend $75,000, Mr. President, to stabilize it because it's just falling down. How are we approaching this? Is it a federal, state, cooperative venture that nobody wanted to pay for it? Mm-hmm. What do we do?
Well, the most challenging instances are where it's on private property. It's a wall that was built by, private citizens at some point in the past, and now there's a public safety issue which relates to the failure because, the guidance that we've got from the finance department is that we can't just come in as a city and fix it. And I know there's some conversation about whether and how that may be the case. We need a program, and we may need some changes in state legislation in order to amass the capital that we need in order to get the work done and then create some stream of payments, whether it includes grant money is a different conversation, over a long period of time, decades, to actually pay off that work. And I think we're working hard. We're starting to see models in other states, but how much of that applies to Pennsylvania is a question.
So we're risking a catastrophe. It is not your fault. We've been kicking it down the road for decades. I get it. But it's at the critical mass point where literally houses are going to start caving in. And when SEPTA and PennDOT kind of throw their hands up about it, well, if that house falls down the hill, it's going to wind up on the tracks.
Right.
So we're in this together. And so my final piece, because I heard the bell, is that traffic is a problem. There are parts of my district, Manayunk, East Falls, Roxborough, that don't want any more development, literally, because during rush hour, they cannot get in and out of their neighborhoods. I know these things don't happen overnight. Are we in negotiations, along with the county partners, to create a third bridge over the Schuylkill so that we can get some people in and out of there.
Yeah.
I know that's a 10-year
Yeah.
down the road project, but if development picks up like it's projected to do along that waterfront, we have Venice Island, we have other projects that are on the pike, how are they getting out of there? And so, just like we need to think in decades terms, it's time that we asked our counterparts in the counties, along with our federal elected officials, to say it's time to put in an appropriation for a third crossing and see how that works.
We're happy to participate in that. No one has come to the Streets Department or Office of Transportation.
Well, I want this record with that stenographer, I am officially asking you that, because if all you have to do is ride down Ridge Avenue in the morning, all you have to do is hit Midvale and Main Street to know that getting across that East Falls Bridge is a nightmare at times. We need another crossing. Where'd you recommend it, Josh? We want Domino Lane, so it's on the record. And I know it takes a while, it takes studies. I know it also means working on the arteries that lead up to the bridge, because if you only create a bridge, you still create funnels. I get all of that, but it's time to start thinking about it. Those parts of my district are becoming overdeveloped. They've become discovered. As they price out of other areas, they're coming up there and creating a quality of life issue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. And the Commissioner, before you do that Domino Lane Bridge, make sure you get my Montgomery Avenue Bridge done, sir.
Yes,
I've been asking for that like 10 years.
Yes, sir. We are working towards that, working with Amtrak.
Let me
to
get
get
mine
that
in
done.
first, Count.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. Chair recognizes, not here. Okay, Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President. We could use a bridge in the northwest too. We could use a little help getting up to the northwest. So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I want to just first start out by saying thank you, because Commissioner, your office, your whole team has just been so responsive to the needs of the 8th District. And whenever we call, you all respond. And so I just really wanted to go on the record, number one, and say thank you. And that it's greatly appreciated and, does not go unnoticed. And so, the reward for good, hard work is more work. And so with that being said, I did want to ask you just about a couple of things that, we've talked about before. Excuse my voice. We've talked about before, but I wanted to just go on the record and see where we are on these matters. And one of the things is regarding trash. Really, when it comes to streets, even beyond sort of potholes and issues like that, there are two things that I hear most from my constituents about. One is trash. The other is speeding. And I know that we've talked a lot about speeding, about speed bumps, about how do we slow people down, and we've done a lot of work on it. But it just feels like we're hitting each block as it comes to our attention, and we're not proactively, or I should say strategically, trying to figure out how do we get in front of the speeding problem that we have in the city of Philadelphia. I had a community meeting about a month or two ago, and it was actually about a homicide, and it flipped from being about a homicide to speeding. And I just thought, wow, like homicide, speed bumps, like two completely separate issues. But people really wanted to talk about speeding and speed bumps as well, as because they feel like they're taking their lives in their hands when they cross the street in some neighborhoods. Myself, I've been rear-ended twice. Once by a drunk driver, once by somebody who probably wasn't paying attention, looking at their phone or something. I've had my cat run over in front of my house and killed, and so speeding is a problem. I have my own, I just say those as examples of my own personal experience. but speeding is a problem in the city of Philadelphia. So if you could talk to us a little bit about that, and I apologize if this has already been something that you covered.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And I'll also share the mic with Deputy Commissioner Montanez to add, but I think that's the premise of the Vision Zero, in which the mayor signed in last year to look at areas of the city. We have the high injury network that demonstrates where those accidents are happening, headed up by Deputy Managing Director Carroll and his team, and Kelly Yemen for Vision Zero, who ultimately helps us use that data to identify where those locations are where people are getting injured and killed, and to start to develop capital programs behind those type of projects. Also, I think it's very helpful that Rich Montanez and his team is also looking at slow zones in those locations where we're having those problems as well.
Now, is it possible for us as district council members to get a list of what the hot spots are in my district in terms of where the injuries are, where the accidents are, what's happening? Because I think sometimes people feel that their block, people are speeding on my block and they're not speeding anywhere else. And so I need speed bumps right here and right now. And so there's no doubt that they're speeding, but there also are priorities, and I would say priorities should be in certain areas like around schools and daycare centers and things of that nature, commercial corridors. But is there a way for us to get like a map of, by district, where the hot spots are, where the, like a heat map, so to speak?
Yes, we can share the high injury network map with
That
your
would be
district
great.
in your
That'd
area.
be great.
Yes, absolutely. And also, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Montanez. We certainly had a tour of all of those,
Yes.
those locations in your
Yes.
district where there was concerns. The residents were very passionate, certainly about it. And I think that type of communication with them helping us identify what the issues that we're facing was very helpful.
Yes.
We were able to educate them on the process for speed cushions and other traffic calming mechanisms, and they seemed very enthusiastic about ongoing working relationships. We want to do that citywide, of course, with all residents and council members in their districts, but I thought it was an excellent example of how we can
think
work
so.
together to try to identify solutions to long-term problems that they're having.
And I couldn't agree more. I think that, you guys coming out, I think it was a great tour, conversation. People from the communities were really happy that you all came out, that you cared, and were able to show a level of expertise and knowledge that, things that they might not have thought of in the equations.
And Councilwoman, we're looking to install 50 new locations this year with speed cushions. And we're also working with Harrisburg to see if we can get a pilot program for speed cameras.
Oh, very good. So we could possibly get more speed cameras?
It's currently still needs state legislation to pass, and it'll be something similar to the red light running
Okay,
bills.
I'm sorry, I was thinking of red light cameras.
No,
Okay.
we can currently install red light cameras at the
Right.
request of council.
Okay, all right. And trash. The city is awfully dirty. We work, folks work very hard. I'm not, don't take that as I'm saying that you all aren't working hard, because I know how hard you're working. But we have a real problem anytime that, and I've seen this myself, where someone is within arm's reach of a trash can, and they won't even do this to put their trash in a trash can. They'll just do this and drop it right where they are. And it's like, there's a trash can right there. I've seen folks throw a pizza box out of the window of their car. And it's, it's a mindset. So I don't know how we get in front of that. With all of the work that you all do, it's like, like somebody was saying earlier, and actually an example from my district, last week, I gave you a call about an area, Germantown. You guys came out, did a great job, fantastic, and came right back 2 days later and dumped again. So it's so frustrating in terms of how do we get in front of the trash problem we have.
Yeah, you're right, 100% in terms of we have to change the mindset of those individuals. How do we do that is a big question. We have to try to catch them in the act in terms of enforcement.
Yes.
That's what we're trying to do. It's difficult for the average everyday citizen that is tossing it out of a car or not placing it in a trash can. I think that starts with educating our youth to teach them those habits in the first place of the importance of litter prevention on our streets. And we do have to have some kind of stronger enforcement mechanisms in place. I certainly want to turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Warren to give his thoughts as well. But as you mentioned earlier, the challenges that we face in our department, that area in Germantown, we were able to get there quickly, but the next day someone comes right out and dumps on it. So I think what's I think is a very effective is the network of cameras that we're looking at to try to, again, catch people in the act. I'm very enthusiastic, more so than I've been in the past. I've been doing this for a long time, that we now are looking at mechanisms for people to be able to use tools to catch people. I think that is going to be huge in areas that they were dumping on and where we serviced last week. And then they came back because people now think that's okay to do it. They become habitual where they can come out and say, that's the dump spot. Let the streets department get it because they're going to get it anyway eventually. Or a trash can, they put it next to a trash can. But it begins to create health issues and safety issues. I feel very sorry for the elderly, as I do with anyone who has to be exposed to living next to those conditions. And so I think those preventive methods are going to help us over the long term once we make those investments. And so those cameras, I can't wait till they start to be installed sometime in the immediate future. But we think we're going to be a very effective tool for that. Deputy Commissioner Warren, I didn't want to take up too much time, but I know you had to add to it.
Oh, no. Again, as the Commissioner said, the expanding the camera program and where we were able to install the additional cans helped out. But in your district, especially across the whole city, the key, I think, will be neighborhood engagement. And there are a lot of engaged groups in your district. And your trash council has been a big help. Germantown, CDC, Knightstown, to mention a few. Also some key residents, Ms. Weiss, are very engaged. And that's what we need. We need community assistance to police those bad behaviors and residents that just won't allow it in their neighborhood. And me working with your council last year, which inspired the mobile drop-off locations that we used last summer in your Operation Summer House program. And so as a result of that, we are looking at potentially putting another citizens drop-off in your area if we can work out some things with the state and get the proper location for it.
Okay.
So things like that. Community is what it's going to take. And in your district, we get a lot of community and civic pushback and assistance to help us fight those types of behaviors.
Well, thank you so much for all the work that you do, and listen, I see your folks out working days, working nights. I call the commissioner if something was, if I get a call, oh, they forgot my block, they come right back out and cover it, and you all do just a great job. So I know it's a uphill battle that we're all challenged with when it comes to both speeding and with trash, but I just really wanted to say many thanks to you. And the other thing I was going to suggest is that in terms of enforcement officers, has there or is there a plan to increase the number of enforcement officers to help us? I think, if we levy the fines appropriately, that some of these problems could go away, and some of these the enforcement officers hired, it could pay for itself.
So that is going to be part of our acts for next year, to expand the education and enforcement part of sanitation to help. Currently, we are limited to 60 officers covering the whole city, and that again is very challenging. So we will be looking at trying to expand that program next year.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And again, I just really want to say thanks, and thanks for working with our 8th District Trash Task Force and the Germantown Special Services District, and all of our districts, and your responsiveness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Council President, thank you very much. And Commissioner Williams, always it's good to be in your company. And I just want to reiterate what I said on Weather Nation the other day when they asked about getting ready for the storm. I said, I have no concern. We have the finest, and I mean this sincerely, streets department in the nation.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
And I'll continue to speak out because your people are out there in all the elements. And the reason I can speak about it, I can personally attest to it in a small way. When I was ground supervisor at Friends Hospital, I collected the trash and we didn't have modern, we actually did it in a dump truck. They don't do it that way anymore. There's all kinds of rules against it. And we also, plowed the snow, and I was running the plows, and it's not easy work, so I commend you. I do have a couple questions, and I really want to thank Councilwoman Bass for bringing these up and continuing on that. And it's also about littering and short dumping. Is the Streets Department, are they authorized? Are they the ones that are giving fines and so on? And
There's multiple agencies that can do it. The police can do it as well. We're the primary department that issues litter violations because we're out there patrolling, and that's their primary responsibility. Officers do assist us when needed. They have the authority to issue violations clip as well as license and inspection. So we have multiple agencies that can address different forms of litter conditions depending on where it's at.
There's nothing that gets under my skin more than a short dumper who actually knows what they're doing. They come with a dump truck and literally think they found a quiet place, which never is a quiet place, and just, let the truck dump and, and then kind of laugh as they go back to the suburbs. I mean, in some ways. What can we do to make your job easier? Can we up the fines? What can we do to help the fight?
Right. I think council last year did increase the number of fines, the amount of the fine, and so that we can enforce that. That was one big giant help for us.
What is it now?
It was up to $1,000 per incident.
Well, that's a good number.
It used to be $300, but now it's up to $1,000.
If somebody gives you a $1,000 fine, you're paying attention.
If they're caught using a vehicle, it could be up to $5,000 and confiscation of the vehicle, depending on the severity. I think those things are very helpful.
I would also, if I could, at some point, chat with your office, whoever's in charge. How does this go? How's it working going to enforcement? I mean, I guess at some point it gets adjudicated. Or, some people wait for a hearing. Like what is the percentage of collection? What happens at adjudication? Are we meeting adjudicators that are like very soft and say, oh, you know what, we'll put this down and this.
Right. The Office of Administrative Review is the agency responsible for processing and adjudicating those violations and citations for Streets Department. So there's two forms. There's a civil penalty and then there's a criminal penalty. And the one I was speaking with a little earlier is certainly a civil penalty where sweep officers issue a co-violation notice and then it gets adjudicated. Someone either can pay the fine or they can actually fight it. And
I'm not looking at really homeowners. I mean, sometimes they mistake, and if they learn that, hey, you're not allowed to put this out, they'll change their.
Right. So
I'm looking at the real short dumpers.
Yeah. So traditionally, that's what we do in Streets Department, but we're working with the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet. We have some examples and some successes with the District Attorney's Office in which we actually caught a number of people illegal dumping, and that has resulted in significant fines, and we hopefully in the future, if it's that severe, it'll result in imprisonment and community service. Those are the things that we want to move towards. I think the fine hasn't been enough for them to discourage them to continue doing it. People say, well, I'm going to get a $75 fine or a $50 fine. I could just go in there and sneak in and do it. But $1,000 makes a difference.
You're getting their attention because many times a smaller fine would be less than maybe the tipping fee at a legitimate
that is correct.
Dump.
And that's what we're experiencing, but I think with the help of City Council.
Well, I'd love it when things calm down a bit, maybe over the summer, sit with you and your staff.
We would
to
love
go
to.
over this a little better.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
really want to make a difference on that. The other thing that Councilwoman Bass brought up, and I just want to make a comment on it, and then I do have one other question I have two more questions, and would be Vision Zero. With Bob Pervetti has been in my office and talked about this for a long time, and I'll tell you, those that don't get it, to hear the grandmother talk about the Roosevelt Boulevard when she lost most of her family on one night. I think she lost two grandchildren, her daughter, and I may not get it all right. It was absolutely awful, and to hear her in her own words explain about it and how they were kind of run over as if they were almost trash. This is awful, and so whatever your department wants to do, along with the state and along with the Vision Zero people, I'm willing to do. And that, accounts for speed cameras or anything. The Roosevelt Boulevard is like I-95 in a residential community. I mean, people try to cross it because you got to get to the other side. I think we've done some great things with crossings, but we're not there yet. And some of these speeders just take this all for granted. They're running around. They could scare the heck out of people just driving right in front of them, and particularly motorcycles. Awful. So anything to make it more safe, count me in. I'm there.
Thank you, Councilman.
The question I have with this year's street paving, about how many miles of street will be paved?
Oh, at the end of this current fiscal year, 75 miles.
75 miles.
Yes, with the additional paving crew and the investment that the administration made next year with the second paving crew, we hope to get over 100 miles.
Oh, really?
And then, of course, with the third paving crew over the next 3 to 4 years, we hope to get to 131 miles. And that's would get our streets back into a state of good repair and then reduce the number of potholes and defects that you're seeing around the streets that we're currently experiencing and having
that's
to
of course
address.
the weather related as
And
well.
it's weather
Freezing and
related.
thawing
Yep.
and snowstorms coming left and right. Yep. Councilman Dom had given me a question before he left, and if I go to ask it this time, and this is in his words, with 25% of all purchases now, everybody buying things that are online, they now have delivery, and you have a lot of additional vehicles on the street along with Uber and Lyft vehicles. Do we have a plan? Does the department have a plan to deal with this, or is it just all so new yet?
Well, I think Deputy Managing Director Mike Carroll is working closely along with our department over an overall plan for the entire city of Philadelphia. So I'll ask and refer to him in terms of what the city's overall strategy towards the congestion of the increase in transportation that you're seeing.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. And so you may have heard me earlier speaking about the work we're doing to try and address issues around goods movement. And so some of those issues are focused on, big trucks trying to navigate narrow streets. Some of those issues are dealing with issues a number of council people have raised around truck parking on streets. And then the kind of the third wheel here is to deal with the curbside. Who's using the curbside? Are they there where they shouldn't be because there's no parking, or maybe it's a travel lane that they stopped in? How long do they need to be there? We're trying to figure out answers to what times of day are appropriate for deliveries to take place, given everything else that's going on. And on the one hand, you want to make sure they're not interfering with the traffic, but then you don't want to necessarily disrupt neighborhoods where people want to be asleep and they don't want to deal with the noises around loading. So there's a lot of little trade-offs involved in that, and we've started to get some data together, and along with the other kind of planning work that I'm talking about, that freight, that good movements piece is one of the fundamental things we have to figure out. So that's going to be worked on, the framework set this year, the data collected this year, and it's not going to be a one-year process, but that solution starts to become a little clearer.
I mean, I live on a very small street, and I would have to say our street traffic has increased dramatically between, UPS, DHL or DHS, not DHS, DHL, and other services delivering things. And Amazon uses sometimes people's private cars, sort of like an Uber or Lyft situation. You don't even know who they are, and then all of a sudden they're your neighbor, dropping things off, which is fine. But the fact is there is considerably more traffic on all our streets. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
That concludes Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
Thank you, Council
You're welcome,
President.
Council Lady.
So first of all, Commissioner, great to see you. I love the block captains rally. I'm a huge fan of your junior block captains in particular.
Great
Met a
having you
couple of them that are huge advocates and young people who are really thinking, broadly about being not only great young people and citizens, but really focusing in on the things that they think make a difference in the city, which is trash and littering. I think that litter has a lot to do with as much social behaviors as it does with logistical efforts. And so I'm always interested in ways that we can take a look at some of the more programs that go outside the traditional structures of fines and penalties, and to what can be done to change the nature of how people look at their, young people especially, look at their environment.
Excellent, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So thank you. So I've been focused on trying to improve pedestrian walkways, and this might be a section for Mr. Carroll, but as well as for your whole team, so that, you know, people are not blocked from safe pathways while there is considerable construction and development going on in certain parts of our city. Can you provide some update on the department's work in this area? For example, is there any data from the last 2 years showing what the progress has been, like full closures versus partial closures? And is there any data related to the number of illegal closures that have been issued violations in the past?
Sure. I'll start off, and then let Deputy Manager Carroll and Deputy Commissioner Montanez also talk a little bit more. This year's budget ask ultimately it gave us the capacity to increase enforcement and inspections with the right-of-way. Part of that includes ensuring that we get plans completed on time, which is ultimately a revenue generator for the city of Philadelphia, that we can charge fees. But part of that plan, Councilwoman, requires them to submit a pedestrian walkway and transportation plan that shows us how pedestrians can safely move throughout and around the construction site. We've added additional inspectors to be able to enforce those right-of-way issues. And so I think you're going to start to see improvements. As you know, the city of Philadelphia is still a city of booming development, but we want to make sure we have safe corridors for people to pass while safe construction is going on. And I'll certainly turn it over to Deputy Managing Director Carroll, who can add to that as well.
So Councilwoman, we'll try and get you some data on the patterns and trends with respect to violations as well as the permit activity. Generally speaking, you know, we continue to see a lot of construction and utility work activity in the streets, so I feel it's safe to say that we're still in that kind of dense, you know, high impact environment as far as pedestrians are concerned navigating the streets safely. I think the good news is what the commissioner is saying, is that the help is on the way, and we're getting the people, the bodies we need to make sure that at the front end, when people are talking about projects, we're doing plan review thoroughly, and we're working with them to make sure that they have best practice plans for what we call maintenance protection of traffic, really work zone management, kind of detouring people appropriately around these sites. Secondly, they're getting the permits, and then we're out there enforcing the permits and making sure that there's some penalty for people that aren't obeying the rules. So I think there will be some improvement. You know, in terms of pedestrian safety, pedestrian facilities, sidewalks in general, it's very important we make sure that the people using the right-of-way treat these facilities as, you know, a city asset everybody needs to be able to use. But also there's a variety of issues that are similar to issues related to all of the private infrastructure, whether we're talking about alleys and, you know, and driveways and, you know, retaining walls. And we're doing work in addition to the things that we're talking about in terms of managing the right-of-way to get an assessment about the quality of the pavement, the quality of the sidewalks throughout the city. And that's just really getting started, and we're looking for resources to kind of extend that work and you know, in terms of geography of the city that we can look at. Again, we need a strategy which allows us to amass some capital or work with households, businesses, so forth, to make investments in these sidewalks, to improve the quality of the sidewalks, make sure they're continuous and that they're safe, and, you know, some way to get some form of stream of payments to pay that down over time. So that same kind of work we need to do to address those other, what I call private infrastructure problems, we need to tee that up for sidewalks as well, clearly.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I want to make sure is that, you know, there's like, you have such an enormous scope of work. I just wanted to be really focused in on just the closure. So, you know, in part, we are tracking partial versus full closures. We're tracking whether,
That's
you know,
right.
people are being dissuaded from the full closures, moving
and we will
towards the
get you
partial.
that data.
Okay, great. And are we now able to impose increased permit fees for sites that engage in illegal closures before they're able to obtain a valid permit? I know that that was a technological issue that had been in place before, and I was wondering if that had been solved.
Yeah, I'll let Deputy Commissioner Montanez fill you in on where we are with that, yes.
Yes, Councilwoman, so if we catch somebody who legally closed, their permit fee actually doubles.
Okay. And so we're able to impose and collect on those fees now?
Correct.
Okay, great. That's good news to hear. Thank you very much for that. So one other separate area that I want to ask about, so I'm very much interested in the city's Vision Zero plan, in particular in relationship to crashes that occur in and near schools, and for youth who travel to and from school. Is there any update on what we're doing in this area and how we're using data related to crashes that occur near and around schools?
Yes.
Public, private, parochial?
So we're
charter?
continuing to pursue grants, and we've actually expanded the number of grants that we're pursuing, which are adjacent to schools. We're coordinating with the school district on which sites and also other stakeholders. We're looking to hire a Safe Routes to School coordinator who will focus on this issue, not just from the perspective of identifying and working through projects, but also there's an education component, and there's a component which deals with doing engagement work with schools and school communities to look for alternatives, the best alternatives for folks to get their kids to school every day.
And as you're seeing certain hotspots crop up, is there a concerted effort to, are there going to be any physical changes to areas? Could you share a little
So
bit
these
around that?
grants that we're looking at are actually for infrastructure improvements. So that includes improvements such as creating bump outs so that there's waiting space for kids as they're waiting to cross the street. Some improvements to the footway if appropriate, if we have access to that. There's improvements that go in terms of creating flashers, signal improvements also.
And are these state or federal? State?
These are federal dollars typically that flow through the state, and the DVRPC is the region's MPO.
And we applied for one 2 years ago, I think. Is that right?
Well,
Did we ever-
we've been applying
Okay.
consistently over the last few years for school-related projects.
Have we been successful, though?
Yeah, we have been
Okay.
fairly successful.
And so is there an example of a situation where the city received a grant, worked on it with the school, and those which schools would you
I'll
point me
try and
to?
get you a full list.
Okay,
I
that would
wouldn't
be
want to tell you off
helpful.
the top of my head.
Thank you. And it's good to hear about the Safe Routes Coordinator. Do you know, are they partnering or working with our community schools in particular? Are
Yeah,
they focused on
there
this?
is a focus to work with community schools on these issues.
Great. So I'm a biker, and I know that with the weather, and you and I, Mr. Carroll, had a chance to go to, thanks to a Knight Foundation's grant, had a chance to go visit the city of Copenhagen. This winter, there was a little bit of grief when, as you're traveling down, Chestnut Street, noticing that most of the plows dumped all the snow right into the bike lane.
Yeah.
Has there been any change in policy? Will there be a change in policy? How can we assure that that doesn't happen next winter?
So
Or
we-
potentially this spring, given our insane weather patterns?
Yeah, well, hopefully not this spring. Yeah, there's outreach that we need to be on top of with the University City District as well as Penn and the other users along the corridor. We have had more success as the seasons progress in terms of treating Chestnut Street. I think that there's both an improvement in that coordination, the communication with people, what they should and shouldn't do, and hopefully that continues in the next season and thereon. But also, we're starting to figure out what methods to use and what kind of equipment are appropriate. So recently, we were able to outfit some smaller, more nimble equipment with plow, and possibly in some instances, maybe broom equipment that we can use within that space, within that confined space. So you should see an improvement next year.
Okay. And then just for clarity, is there like a no dumping in bike lanes policy for snow?
Correct.
There is. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry for that delay. I know a number of people have asked questions regarding a number of topics. One, I want to thank the Streets Department working along with L&I, District Attorney's Office and Police Department regarding the short dumping legislation that we did recently. I know one of the challenges is how we do the enforcement of that legislation, and I look forward to maybe having some ongoing conversations with you, as I've had with other departments, about how we can find ways to get more people involved in reference to helping to be the eyes and ears of short dumping. I know it's very challenging. There's been initiatives in the years past where we try to use cameras, and they've moved cameras from different locations. I know you're familiar with what we did at the Logan site, where we had cameras for a short period of time, but we have limited resources in the city, so we're not always able to do that. But I want to segue to just some other questions I have in reference to zero waste.
Yes.
Does this, and I know there is a zero waste cabinet? That's
Zero waste and litter cabinet, yes.
right, okay. Litter cabinet. So, question: well, let me step back. Looking at some questions from last year, where are we in reference to ideas regarding composting? Because I know that's part of the conversation. I know there's certain EPA goals and goals that the Streets Department has, but from my observation, until we come up with some type of composting initiative that is geographically based in various parts of the city that allow people to do composting in their general communities, we won't be able to get to the true goals of composting and reducing the costs. The impacts are, our tipping fees and the landfill costs. So where are we in that regard? Because you have commercial entities that do composting, but I want to how are we moving forward on a citywide composting initiative?
Yeah. So, Councilman, I'm extremely pleased to announce that we just received the much anticipated report on organics, the feasibility study. We just actually received it this month, literally. We certainly will be sharing that with your office as we go through it with the zero waste and litter cabinet, which shows what the potential for the city of Philadelphia and specifically residential composting and organics can offer in terms of waste diversion. I can give you some snapshots of the report, which looked at processing capacity, which is the biggest issue. We wanted to make sure that there is enough of locations for us to be able to extract the material and actually put it back into productive use. Deputy Managing Director Carol, along with Nick Exposito and myself, has also been meeting the waste companies to talk about organics options and waste to energy options that could exist in terms of using that material for our waste stream. So we're having some very positive initial conversations. Certainly, we want to be more developed than where we are right now, but that's going to give us options to show where the processing capacity is in the city of Philadelphia. Right now, I think we need about 200,000 tons of processing capacity, and I think we're at 50,000 right now with the city of Philadelphia. So there is opportunity for advancement. I think we have the opportunity also to work very closely with waste companies to encourage private development to be able to build these type of facilities here in the city of Philadelphia. And I think we're going to take advantage of our next round of waste contracts to be able to encourage that type of investment.
So well, it's good to hear that in reference to the feasibility study. Your comments bring a couple different ideas to mind, initiatives like there could be options for P3 concepts from public-private partnerships, which I've had a chance to work on some initiatives like PGW is doing a P3 initiative with our liquefied natural gas facilities. That P3 idea could be something that can be used in a broader way than what people have traditionally viewed P3 opportunities, and maybe that could be an opportunity on the composting perspective. I think part of it is also an education plan. So no matter what type of plan we have in reference to composting, even if we have locations around the city where people can take their organics to for a composting initiative, because of some of the challenges that arise with composting in reference to other, I'll say, friendly inhabitants of our city who sometimes attracted to composting. And also from my own research from the challenges we had, well, not we, but in reference to the digester in Delaware, where it was not being used properly, and that sorting of materials was not occurring properly, and so as a result, everything, I think people were just putting everything in, which also attracted some of those friendly inhabitants of the state of Delaware, which made a quality of life issue in reference to odor and other things that had constituents not wanting to do composting. I think that was an unfortunate situation in reference to how that operation occurred. So regardless, it needs to be a sustained messaging and communication strategy and the benefits of composting and how this reduces expenses that we have as a city. And it's another way of how we can reduce our costs and expenses and have more resources in the general fund to do other activities in the city. So it's good to hear about that. Now, does the city, are you going to be using this organics feasibility study to come up with a solid waste management plan?
Well, it's a part of, we have a solid waste management plan currently that can be updated with new technologies and new strategies. And so every 10 years, we submit that to state DEP, which kind of highlights what the city has done and the potential for expansion into the future. So we will use that feasibility study to update that plan to show what the city is doing. I think some of the work that was been done by the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet, it was to be able to get a permit at Fairmount Parks Recycling Center.
I'm reading my notes. That's my next question.
Fairmount Parks Recycling Center to expand organics recycling, especially for events, the number of special events that we have in the city of Philadelphia. It's been a great opportunity for us to explore even more potential avenues for us to be able to do organic composting there. To be able to get that permit was a giant first step for us. And so we've done it at events like the Philadelphia Marathon, where we had 90% diversion, which was a great accomplishment from the cabinet. We started Philocycle, which we have kind of the Waste Watchers program at these locations, where it teaches people, when you mentioned education, how to sort waste and why it's important. I think those continued events is going to help us promote organics from the small individual level all the way up to the commercial establishment level to be able to make us that transition. Because you're right, it's going to take a lot of education for people to learn.
So just to make sure I understand, so that proposal has been approved by DEP to allow the entire Fairmount Park to be used?
The permit was actually achieved, and it was actually accomplished, yes. And so we started it actually with the last marathon event, where they were able to achieve was 90% diversion from that event.
That's good to know. And now, when you talked earlier, and I asked a question about solid waste management plan, you said the city currently has one, but how are we, and you said it's updated every 10 years, how are we incorporating new technology in reference to achieve those goals? And the reason I say that, because if you look at our sanitation trucks, we basically were using the same style of sanitation truck since late 60s, early 70s. Whereas, and I brought this up in past budget hearings, whereas other jurisdictions have used different types of sanitation trucks in reference to that allow some of the things we're talking about from a composting perspective, let me step back, not composting, from a recycling perspective, and separating products and just doing things differently than we've done. And just from my observation, I'll just be frank, I think the city does a phenomenal job of collecting trash. We've done a great job of collecting trash for a long time, but we're not innovative in reference to how we really strategically look at what we're doing with trash. Like a question I have, do we have any planning people within the streets department?
Yes, actually, we have our planning director here today with us, Scott McGrath, who's constantly looking at these issues, and certainly when we brought single stream recycling to the city of Philadelphia, the planning division played a huge role in determining and making that transition for us to use a different recycling process. And we're constantly looking at those mechanisms and ways to improve service. We've even looked at issues of whether we can do mechanical lifting, which unfortunately hasn't worked here because of the density of our city and our streets. But we've looked at so many other avenues to try to change compactors and so forth in the past.
I would push back a little bit on the mechanical. We'll have a conversation offline about that. But from the perspective of, because I think one of the major issues we have in the city, and sanitation division of District Council 33 is one of our larger divisions of that union, and I think because of the equipment that we've historically used, that forces us to throw more manpower at projects, whereas we had better equipment in reference to mechanical and other types of sanitation vehicles, we can use less manpower and divert manpower to do other types of collections. Like, for example, could we be collecting in some areas of the city twice a week because of the density of location where they need maybe twice a week pickup because they're in a very tight, congested part of the city where you don't have a location where you can put a trash can in your backyard because you don't really have a backyard. And so people tend to just take trash, put it by a big belly, or just put it outside the window, which increases the trash around the city of Philadelphia. So when I talk about planning and being strategic, those are some things I think go together to a comprehensive plan that I think we really need to be looking at going forward to enhance the city, to reduce trash, improve the quality of life, not only for our members of organized labor like District Council 33, but also provide a better opportunity and reduce costs for the city as a whole.
Yeah, I agree, Councilman. A couple of avenues in which we work together in terms of looking at waste strategies. We have a solid waste and a recycling advisory council that we meet with every month to discuss waste diversion and waste collection strategies, along with Mr. McGrath sits on that cabinet as well as myself. And we certainly talk about strategies for different forms of waste collection, collections being one of them. There are also certain parts of the city where we're challenged. The Temple University area comes to mind. We're working very closely with the managing director's office to try to figure out ways to increase collections in those areas. It's resource driven with staff and equipment. But we are looking at ways, and we work with the landlords in that area because it's such a high development commodity where you have a lot of tenancy and students population that comes in and out. That's a challenge for us, and so we're certainly looking at those ways in which we can reduce the litter because the neighborhood communities that reside there are paying the price for that. So we're working with Temple University as well. Scott, who is here with me right now from our planning and unit for sanitation, can talk about some other strategies. I certainly want to talk about where people place their trash, household trash with your office. We do have a program that we think that's going to help with that. It's in its infant stage, so I don't want to share too many details today until I give you a full concept, but I'm looking forward to sharing that with other council members as well.
Commissioner, Councilman, I'm going to have to interrupt. We have promised the stenographer she's got to get her lunch break. Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Okay?
Sorry,
So,
Councilman. Sorry, stenographer.
Councilman, do you have any other questions? Because
Who am I to divert our
Pardon me?
stenographer?
Okay.
Who am I to divert the stenographer?
I mean,
between now
we
and
could
lunch?
call the, sorry to interrupt you, sir, but if we could call the streets department back another time if they have to. Okay, all right. So with that, thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Councilman.
Okay?
And I'll talk to you.
All right, the aviation is not going to be coming up today. We're going to be rescheduled. So at call 2:45, we'll hear from the Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity. Thank you. Yeah. Just 2:45.